Despite his months on the island, Michael still could not get used to the Sicilian touchiness on matters of sex, and this was extreme, even for a Sicilian. But the two shepherds seemed to take it as a matter of course. They were waiting for him to leave. Fabrizio said,
"The old bastard mentioned he has 2 sons, big, tough lads that he has only to whistle up. Let's get going."
Michael gave him a cold stare. Up to now, he had been a quiet, gentle young man, a typical American, except that, since he was hiding in Sicily, he must have done something manly. This was the first time the shepherds had seen the Corleone stare. Don Tomasino, knowing Michael's true identity and deed, had always been wary of him, treating him as a fellow man of respect. But these unsophisticated sheep-herders had come to their own opinion of Michael, and not a wise one. The cold look, Michael's rigid white face, his anger that came off him like cold smoke off ice, sobered their laughter and snuffed out their familiar friendliness. When he saw he had their proper, respectful attention, Michael said to them,
"Get that man out here to me."
They didn't hesitate. They shouldered their lupadas and went into the dark coolness of the cafe. A few seconds later, they reappeared with the cafe owner between them. The stubby man looked in no way frightened, but his anger had a certain wariness about it. Michael leaned back in his chair and studied the man for a moment. Then he said very quietly,
"I understand I've offended you by talking about your daughter. I offer you my apologies. I'm a stranger in this country. I don't know the customs that well. Let me say this. I meant no disrespect to you or her."
The shepherd bodyguards were impressed. Michael's voice had never sounded like this before when speaking to them. There was command and authority in it, though he was making an apology. The cafe owner shrugged, more wary still, knowing he was not dealing with some farm boy.
"Who are you? And what do you want from my daughter?"
Without even hesitating, Michael said,
"I'm an American hiding in Sicily, from the police of my country. My name is Michael. You can inform the police and make your fortune, but then your daughter would lose a father rather than gain a husband. In any case, I want to meet your daughter. With your permission and under the supervision of your family, with all decorum, with all respect. I'm an honorable man, and I don't think of dishonoring your daughter. I want to meet her, talk to her, and then, if it hits us both right, we'll marry. If not, you'll never see me again. She may find me unsympathetic, after all, and no man can remedy that. But when the proper time comes, I'll tell you everything about me that a wife's father should know."
All 3 men were looking at him with amazement. Fabrizio whispered in awe,
"It's the real thunderbolt."
The cafe owner, for the first time, didn't look so confident or contemptuous. His anger was not so sure. Finally he asked,
"Are you a friend of the friends?"
Since the word mafia could never be uttered aloud by the ordinary Sicilian, this was as close as the cafe owner could come to asking if Michael was a member of the mafia. It was the usual way of asking if someone belonged, but it was ordinarily not addressed to the person directly concerned.
"No, I'm a stranger in this country."
The cafe owner gave him another look, the smashed left side of his face, the long legs rare in Sicily. He took a look at the 2 shepherds carrying their lupadas quite openly, without fear, and remembered how they had come into his cafe and told him their padrone wanted to talk to him. The cafe owner had snarled that he wanted the son of a bitch out of his terrace, and one of the shepherds had said, "Take my word, it's best you go out and speak to him yourself." And something had made him come out. Now, something made him realize that it would be best to show this stranger some courtesy. He said grudgingly,
"Come Sunday afternoon. My name is Vitelli, and my house is up there on the hill above the village. But come here to the cafe, and I'll take you up."
Fabrizio started to say something, but Michael gave him one look, and the shepherd's tongue froze in his mouth. This was not lost on Vitelli. So when Michael stood up and stretched out his hand, the cafe owner took it and smiled. He would make some inquiries, and if the answers were wrong, he could always greet Michael with his 2 sons bearing their own shotguns. The cafe owner was not without his contacts among the friends of the friends, but something told him this was one of those wild strokes of good fortune that Sicilians always believed in. Something told him that his daughter's beauty would make her fortune and her family secure. And it was just as well. Some of the local youths were already beginning to buzz around, and this stranger with his broken face could do the necessary job of scaring them off. Vitelli, to show his goodwill, sent the strangers off with a bottle of his best and coldest wine. He noticed that one of the shepherds paid the bill. This impressed him even more, made it clear that Michael was the superior of the 2 men who accompanied him. Michael was no longer interested in his hike. They found a garage and hired a car and driver to take them back to Corleone. And, some time before supper, Dr. Taza must have been informed by the shepherds of what had happened. That evening, sitting in the garden, Dr. Taza said to Don Tomasino,
"Our friend got hit by a thunderbolt today."
Don Tomasino did not seem surprised. He grunted.
I wish some of those young fellows in Palermo would get a thunderbolt. Maybe I could get some peace.
He was talking about the new-style mafia chiefs rising in the big cities of Palermo and challenging the power of old regime stalwarts like himself. Michael said to Tomasino,
I want you to tell those two sheep herders to leave me alone Sunday. I'm going to go to this girl's family for dinner, and I don't want them hanging around.
Don Tomasino shook his head.
I'm responsible to your father for you. Don't ask me that. Another thing. I hear you've even talked marriage. I can't allow that until I've sent somebody to speak to your father.
Michael Corleone was very careful. This was, after all, a man of respect.
Don Tomasino, you know my father. He's a man who goes deaf when somebody says the word no to him, and he doesn't get his hearing back until they answer him with a yes. Willie has heard my no many times. I understand about the two guards. I don't want to cause you trouble. They can come with me Sunday. But if I want to marry, I'll marry. Surely if I don't permit my own father to interfere with my personal life, it would be an insult to him to allow you to do so.
The capo mafioso sighed.
Well, then marriage it will have to be. I know your Thunderbolt. She is a good girl from a respectable family. You can't dishonor them without the father trying to kill you, and then you'll have to shed blood. Besides, I know the family well. I can't allow it to happen.
She may not be able to stand the sight of me, and she's a very young girl. She'll think me old.
He saw the two men smiling at him.
I'll need some money for presents, and I think I'll need a car.
The Don nodded.
Fabrizio will take care of everything. He's a clever boy. They taught him mechanics in the Navy. I'll give you some money in the morning, and I'll let your father know what's happening. That I must do.
Michael said to Dr. Taza,
Have you got anything that can dry up this damn snot always coming out of my nose? I can't have that girl seeing me wiping it all the time.
Dr. Taza said,
I'll cure it with a drug before you have to see her. It makes your flesh a little numb, but don't worry. You won't be kissing her for a while yet.
Both Doctor and Don smiled at this witticism. By Sunday, Michael had an Alfa Romeo, battered but serviceable. He had also made a bus trip to Palermo to buy presents for the girl and her family. He had learned that the girl's name was Apollonia, and every night he thought of her lovely face and her lovely name. He had to drink a good deal of wine to get some sleep, and orders were given to the old women servants in the house to leave a chilled bottle at his bedside. He drank it empty every night. On Sunday, to the tolling of church bells that covered all of Sicily, he drove the Alfa Romeo to the village and parked it just outside the cafe. Carlo and Fabrizio were in the back seat with their lupatas, and Michael told them they were to wait in the cafe. They were not to come to the house. The cafe was closed, but Vitelli was there waiting for them, leaning against the railing of his empty terrace. They shook hands all around, and Michael took the 3 packages, the presents, and trudged up the hill with Vitelli to his home. This proved to be larger than the usual village hut. The Vitellis were not poverty-stricken. Inside, the house was familiar with statues of the Madonna entombed in glass, votive lights flickering redly at their feet. The 2 sons were waiting, also dressed in their Sunday black. They were 2 sturdy young men just out of their teens, but looking older because of their hard work on the farm. The mother was a vigorous woman, as stout as her husband. There was no sign of the girl. After the introductions, which Michael did not even hear, they sat in the room that might possibly have been a living room, or just as easily the formal dining room. It was cluttered with all kinds of furniture, and not very large, but for Sicily it was middle-class splendor. Michael gave Signor Vitelli and Signora Vitelli their presents. For the father, it was a gold cigar cutter. For the mother, a bolt of the finest cloth purchasable in Palermo. He still had 1 package for the girl. His presents were received with reserved thanks. The gifts were a little too premature. He should not have given anything until his second visit. The father said to him, in man-to-man, country fashion,
Don't think we're so of no account to welcome strangers into our house so easily. But Don Tomasino vouched for you personally, and nobody in this province would ever doubt the word of that good man. And so we make you welcome. But I must tell you,
that if your intentions are serious about my daughter, we will have to know a little more about you and your family. You can understand. Your family is from this country.
Michael nodded and said politely,
I will tell you anything you wish to know, any time.
Signor Vitelli held up a hand.
I'm not a nosy man. Let's see if it's necessary first. Right now, you are welcome in my house as a friend of Don Tomasino.
Despite the drug painted inside his nose, Michael actually smelled the girl's presence in the room. He turned, and she was standing in the arched doorway that led to the back of the house. The smell was of fresh flowers and lemon blossoms, but she wore nothing in her hair of jet-black curls, nothing on her plain, severe black dress, obviously her Sunday best. She gave him a quick glance and a tiny smile before she cast her eyes down demurely and sat down next to her mother. Again, Michael felt that shortness of breath, that flooding through his body of something that was not so much desire as an insane possessiveness. He understood for the first time the classical jealousy of the Italian male. He was, at that moment, ready to kill anyone who touched this girl, who tried to claim her, take her away from him. He wanted to own her as wildly as a miser wants to own gold coins, as hungrily as a sharecropper wants to own his own land. Nothing was going to stop him from owning this girl, possessing her, locking her in a house, and keeping her prisoner only for himself. He didn't want anyone even to see her. When she turned to smile at one of her brothers, Michael gave that young man a murderous look without even realizing it. The family could see it was a classical case of the thunderbolt, and they were reassured. This young man would be putty in their daughter's hands until they were married. After that, of course, things would change, but it wouldn't matter. Michael had bought himself some new clothes in Palermo and was no longer the roughly dressed peasant, and it was obvious to the family that he was a don of some kind. His smashed face did not make him as evil-looking as he believed, because his other profile was so handsome it made the disfigurement interesting even. And in any case, this was a land where to be called disfigured, you had to compete with a host of men who had suffered extreme physical misfortune. Michael looked directly at the girl, the lovely ovals of her face. Her lips now, he could see, were almost blue, so dark was the blood pulsating in them. He said, not daring to speak her name,
I saw you by the orange groves the other day, when you ran away. I hope I didn't frighten you.
The girl raised her eyes to him for just a fraction. She shook her head, but the loveliness of those eyes had made Michael look away. The mother said tartly,
Apollonia, speak to the poor fellow. He's come miles to see you.
But the girl's long jet lashes remained closed like wings over her eyes. Michael handed her the present wrapped in gold paper, and the girl put it in her lap. The father said,
Open it, girl.
But her hands did not move. Her hands were small and brown, an urchin's hands. The mother reached over and opened the package impatiently, yet careful not to tear the precious paper. The red velvet jeweler's box gave her pause. She had never held such a thing in her hands and didn't know how to spring its catch. But she got it open on pure instinct and then took out the present. It was a heavy gold chain to be worn as a necklace, and it awed them, not only because of its obvious value, but because the gift of gold in this society was a statement of the most serious intentions. It was no less than a proposal of matrimony, or rather the signal that there was the intention to propose matrimony. They could no longer doubt the seriousness of this stranger, and they could not doubt his substance. Apollonia still had not touched her present. Her mother held it up for her to see, and she raised those long lashes for a moment, and then she looked directly at Michael, her doe-like brown eyes grave, and said,
Grazia.
It was the first time he had heard her voice. It had all the velvety softness of youth and shyness, and it set Michael's ears ringing. He kept looking away from her and talking to the father and mother simply because looking at her confused him so much. But he noticed that despite the conservative looseness of her dress, her body almost shone through the cloth with sheer sensuality. And he noticed the darkening of her skin, blushing, the dark, creamy skin going darker with the blood surging to her face. Finally, Michael rose to go, and the family rose too. They said their goodbyes formally, the girl at last confronting him as they shook hands, and he felt the shock of her skin on his skin. Her skin, warm and rough, peasant skin. The father walked down the hill with him to his car and invited him to Sunday dinner the next week. Michael nodded, but he knew he couldn't wait a week to see the girl again. He didn't. The next day, without his shepherds, he drove to the village and sat on the garden terrace of the cafe to chat with her father. Signor Vitelli took pity on him and sent for his wife and daughter to come down to the cafe to join them. This meeting was less awkward. The girl Apollonia was less shy and spoke more. She was dressed in her everyday print frock, which suited her coloring much better. The next day, the same thing happened, only this time Apollonia was wearing the gold chain he had given her, He smiled at her then, knowing that this was a signal to him. He walked with her up the hill, her mother close behind them. But it was impossible for the two young people to keep their bodies from brushing against each other, and once Apollonia stumbled and fell against him so that he had to hold her, and her body, so warm and alive in his hand, started a deep wave of blood rising in his body. They could not see the mother behind them smiling because her daughter was a mountain goat and had not stumbled on this path since she was an infant in diapers, and smiling because this was the only way this young man was going to get his hands on her daughter until the marriage. This went on for 2 weeks. Michael brought her presents every time he came, and gradually she became less shy. But they could never meet without a chaperone being present. She was just a village girl, barely literate, with no idea of the world. But she had a freshness, an eagerness for life that, with the help of the language barrier, made her seem interesting. Everything went very swiftly at Michael's request, and because the girl was not only fascinated by him, but knew he must be rich, a wedding date was set for the Sunday 2 weeks away. Now, Don Tomasino took a hand. He had received word from America that Michael was not subject to orders, but that all elementary precautions should be taken. So Don Tomasino appointed himself the parent of the bridegroom to ensure the presence of his own bodyguards. Carlo and Fabrizio were also members of the wedding party from Corleone, as was Dr. Taza. The bride and groom would live in Dr. Taza's villa, surrounded by its stone wall. The wedding was the usual peasant one. The villagers stood in the streets and threw flowers as the bridal party, principals and guests, went on foot from the church to the bride's home. The wedding procession pelted the neighbors with sugar-coated almonds, the traditional wedding candies, and with candies left over, made sugary white mountains on the bride's wedding bed. In this case, only a symbolic one, since the first night would be spent in the villa outside Corleone. The wedding feast went on until midnight, but bride and groom would leave before that in the Alfa Romeo. When that time came, Michael was surprised to find that the mother was coming with them to the Corleone villa at the request of the bride. The father explained. The girl was young, a virgin, a little frightened. She would need someone to talk to on the morning following her bridal night, to put her on the right track if things went wrong. These matters could sometimes get very tricky. Michael saw Apollonia looking at him with doubt in her huge dough-brown eyes. He smiled at her and nodded. And so it came about that they drove back to the villa outside Corleone with the mother-in-law in the car. But the older woman immediately put her head together with the servants of Dr. Taza, gave her daughter a hug and a kiss, and disappeared from the scene. Michael and his bride were allowed to go to their huge bedroom alone. Apollonia was still wearing her bridal costume, with a cloak thrown over it. Her trunk and case had been brought up to the room from the car. On a small table was a bottle of wine and a plate of small wedding cakes. The huge canopied bed was never out of their vision. The young girl in the center of the room waited for Michael to make the first move. And now that he had her alone, now that he legally possessed her, now that there was no barrier to his enjoying that body and face he had dreamed about every night, Michael could not bring himself to approach her. He watched as she took off the bridal shawl and draped it over a chair and placed the bridal crown on the small dressing table. That table had an array of perfumes and creams that Michael had had sent from Palermo. The girl tallied them with her eyes for a moment. Michael turned off the lights, thinking the girl was waiting for some darkness to shield her body while she undressed. But the Sicilian moon came through the unshuttered windows, bright as gold, and Michael went to close the shutters, but not all the way. The room would be too warm. The girl was still standing by the table, and so Michael went out of the room and down the hall to the bathroom. He and Dr. Taza and Don Tomasino had taken a glass of wine together in the garden while the women had prepared themselves for bed. He had expected to find Apollonia in her nightgown when he returned, already between the covers. He was surprised that the mother had not done this service for her daughter. Maybe Apollonia had wanted him to help her to undress. But he was certain she was too shy, too innocent for such forward behavior. Coming back into the bedroom, he found it completely dark. Someone had closed the shutters all the way. He groped his way toward the bed and could make out the shape of Apollonia's body lying under the covers, her back to him, her body curved away from him and huddled up. He undressed and slipped naked beneath the sheets. He stretched out one hand and touched silky, naked skin. She had not put on her gown, and this boldness delighted him. Slowly, carefully, he put one hand on her shoulder and pressed her body gently so that she would turn to him. She turned slowly, and his hand touched her breast, soft, full, And then she was in his arms so quickly that their bodies came together in one line of silken electricity, and he finally had his arms around her, was kissing her warm mouth deeply, was crushing her body and breasts against him, and then rolling his body on top of hers. Her flesh and hair taut silk. Now she was all eagerness, surging against him wildly in a virginal, erotic frenzy. When he entered her, she gave a little gasp and was still for just a second, and then, in a powerful forward thrust of her pelvis, she locked her satiny legs around his hips. When they came to the end, they were locked together so fiercely, straining against each other so violently, that falling away from each other was like the tremble before death. That night and the weeks that followed, Michael Corleone came to understand the premium put on virginity by socially primitive people. It was a period of sensuality that he had never before experienced, a sensuality mixed with a feeling of masculine power. Apollonia in those first days became almost his slave. Given trust, given affection, a young, full-blooded girl aroused from virginity to erotic awareness was as delicious as an exactly ripe fruit. She, on her part, brightened up the rather gloomy, masculine atmosphere of the villa. She had packed her mother off the very next day after her bridal night and presided at the communal table with bright, girlish charm. Don Tomasino dined with them every night, and Dr. Taza told all his old stories as they drank wine in the garden full of statues garlanded with blood-red flowers. And so the evenings passed pleasantly enough. At night in their bedroom, the newly married couple spent hours of feverish lovemaking. Michael could not get enough of Apollonia's beautifully sculpted body, her honey-colored skin, her huge brown eyes glowing with passion. She had a wonderfully fresh smell, a fleshy smell perfumed by her sex, yet almost sweet and unbearably aphrodisiacal. Her virginal passion matched his nuptial lust, and often it was dawn when they fell into an exhausted slumber. Sometimes, spent but not yet ready for sleep, Michael sat on the window ledge and stared at Apollonia's naked body while she slept. Her face, too, was lovely in repose. A perfect face he had seen before only in art books of painted Italian Madonnas, who by no stretch of the artist's skill could be thought virginal. In the first week of their marriage, they went on picnics and small trips in the Alfa Romeo. But then, Don Tomasino took Michael aside and explained that the marriage had made his presence and identity common knowledge in that part of Sicily, and precautions had to be taken against the enemies of the Corleone family, whose long arms also stretched to this island refuge. Don Tomasino put armed guards around his villa, and the two shepherds, Carlo and Fabrizio, were fixtures inside the walls. So Michael and his wife had to remain on the villa grounds. Michael passed the time by teaching Apollonia to read and write English, and to drive the car along the inner walls of the villa. About this time, Don Tomasino seemed to be preoccupied, in poor company. He was still having trouble with the new mafia in the town of Palermo, Dr. Taza said. One night in the garden, an old village woman who worked in the house as a servant brought a dish of fresh olives and then turned to Michael and said,
"Is it true what everybody is saying, that you are the son of Don Corleone in New York City, the Godfather?"
Michael saw Don Tomasino shaking his head in disgust at the general knowledge of their secret. But the old crone was looking at him in so concerned a fashion, as if it was important for her to know the truth, that Michael nodded.
Do you know my father?
The woman's name was Filomena, and her face was as wrinkled and brown as a walnut, her brown-stained teeth showing through the shell of her flesh. For the first time since he had been in the villa, she smiled at him.
"The Godfather saved my life once, and my brains too."
She made a gesture toward her head. She obviously wanted to say something else, so Michael smiled to encourage her. She asked, almost fearfully,
"Is it true that Luca Brasi is dead?"
Michael nodded again, and was surprised at the look of release on the old woman's face. Filomena crossed herself.
"God forgive me, but may his soul roast in hell for eternity."
Michael remembered his old curiosity about Brasi, and had the sudden intuition that this woman knew the story Hagen and Sonny had refused to tell him. He poured the woman a glass of wine and made her sit down.
Tell me about my father and Luca Brasi. I know some of it, but how did they become friends? And why was Brasi so devoted to my father? Don't be afraid. Come, tell me.
Filomena's wrinkled face, her raisin-black eyes, turned to Don Tomasino, who in some way signaled his permission. And so Filomena passed the evening for them by telling her story. 30 years before, Filomena had been a midwife in New York City on 10th Avenue, servicing the Italian colony. The women were always pregnant, and she prospered. She taught doctors a few things when they tried to interfere in a difficult birth. Her husband was then a prosperous grocery store owner. Dead now, poor soul, she blessed him, though he had been a card player and wencher who never thought to put aside for hard times. In any event, one cursed night 30 years ago, when all honest people were long in their beds, there came a knocking on Philomena's door. She was by no means frightened. It was the quiet hour babes prudently chose to enter safely into this sinful world. And so she dressed and opened the door. Outside, it was Luca Brasi, whose reputation even then was fearsome. It was known also that he was a bachelor, and so Philomena was immediately frightened. She thought he had come to do her husband harm, that perhaps her husband had foolishly refused Brasi some small favor. But Brasi had come on the usual errand. He told Philomena that there was a woman about to give birth, that the house was out of the neighborhood some distance away, and that she was to come with him. Philomena immediately sensed something amiss. Brasi's brutal face looked almost like that of a madman that night. He was obviously in the grip of some demon. She tried to protest that she attended only women whose history she knew, but he shoved a handful of green dollars in her hand and ordered her roughly to come along with him. She was too frightened to refuse. In the street was a Ford, its driver of the same feather as Luca Brasi. The drive was no more than 30 minutes to a small frame house in Long Island City right over the bridge. A two-family house, but obviously now tenanted only by Brasi and his gang. For there were some other ruffians in the kitchen playing cards and drinking. Brasi took Philomena up the stairs to a bedroom. In the bed was a young, pretty girl who looked Irish, her face painted, her hair red, and with a belly swollen like a sow. The poor girl was so frightened. When she saw Brasi, she turned her head away in terror. Yes, terror. And indeed, the look of hatred on Brasi's evil face was the most frightening thing she had ever seen in her life. Here Philomena crossed herself again. To make a long story short, Brasi left the room. 2 of his men assisted the midwife, and the baby was born. The mother was exhausted and went into a deep sleep. Brasi was summoned, and Philomena, who had wrapped the newborn child in an extra blanket, extended the bundle to him and said, "If you're the father, take her. My work is finished." Brasi glared at her, malevolent, insanity stamped on his face. "Yes, I'm the father," he said, "but I don't want any of that race to live. Take it down to the basement and throw it into the furnace." For a moment, Philomena thought she had not understood him properly. She was puzzled by his use of the word race. Did he mean because the girl was not Italian, or did he mean because the girl was obviously of the lowest type? A whore, in short. Or did he mean that anything springing from his loins he forbade to live? And then she was sure he was making a brutal joke. She said shortly, "It's your child. Do what you want." And she tried to hand him the bundle. At this time, the exhausted mother awoke and turned on her side to face them. She was just in time to see Brasi thrust violently at the bundle, crushing the newborn infant against Philomena's chest. She called out weakly, Luke, I'm sorry," and Brasi turned to face her. It was terrible, Philomena said now, so terrible. They were like 2 mad animals. They were not human. The hatred they bore each other blazed through the room. Nothing else, not even the newborn infant, existed for them at that moment. And yet, there was a strange passion, a bloody, demoniacal lust so unnatural you knew they were damned forever. Then Luca Brasi turned back to Philomena and said harshly, "Do what I tell you. I'll make you rich." Philomena could not speak in her terror. She shook her head. Finally she managed to whisper, "You do it. You're the father. Do it, if you like." But Brasi didn't answer. Instead, he drew a knife from inside his shirt. "I'll cut your throat," he said. She must have gone into shock then, because the next thing she remembered, they were all standing in the basement of the house in front of a square iron furnace. Philomena was still holding the blanketed baby, which had not made a sound. Maybe if it had cried. Maybe if I had been shrewd enough to pinch it, Philomena said, that monster would have shown mercy. One of the men must have opened the furnace door. The fire now was visible. And then she was alone with Brasi in that basement with its sweating pipes, its mousy odor. Brasi had his knife out again, and there could be no doubting that he would kill her. There were the flames, there were Brasi's eyes. His face was the gargoyle of the devil. It was not human. It was not sane. He pushed her toward the open furnace door. At this point, Philomena fell silent. She folded her bony hands in her lap and looked directly at Michael. He knew what she wanted, how she wanted to tell him, without using her voice. He asked gently,
"Did you do it?"
She nodded. It was only after another glass of wine and crossing herself and muttering a prayer that she continued her story. She was given a bundle of money and driven home. She understood that if she uttered a word about what had happened, she would be killed. But 2 days later, Brazzi murdered the young Irish girl, the mother of the infant, and was arrested by the police. Philomena, frightened out of her wits, went to the Godfather and told her story. He ordered her to keep silent, that he would attend to everything. At that time, Brazzi did not work for Don Corleone. Before Don Corleone could set matters aright, Luca Brazzi tried to commit suicide in his cell, hacking at his throat with a piece of glass. He was transferred to the prison hospital, and by the time he recovered, Don Corleone had arranged everything. The police did not have a case they could prove in court, and Luca Brazzi was released. Though Don Corleone assured Philomena that she had nothing to fear from either Luca Brazzi or the police, she had no peace. Her nerves were shattered, and she could no longer work at her profession. Finally, she persuaded her husband to sell the grocery store, and they returned to Italy. Her husband was a good man, had been told everything, and understood. But he was a weak man, and in Italy squandered the fortune they had both slaved in America to earn. And so, after he died, she had become a servant. So, Philomena ended her story. She had another glass of wine and said to Michael,
I bless the name of your father. He always sent me money when I asked. He saved me from Brazzi. Tell him I say a prayer for his soul every night, and that he shouldn't fear dying.
After she had left, Michael asked Don Tomasino,
Is her story true?
The capo mafioso nodded, and Michael thought, no wonder nobody had wanted to tell him the story. Some Luca. The next morning, Michael wanted to discuss the whole thing with Don Tomasino, but learned that the old man had been called to Palermo by an urgent message delivered by a courier. That evening, Don Tomasino returned and took Michael aside. News had come from America, he said, news that it grieved him to tell. Santino Corleone had been killed. Chapter 24. The Sicilian sun, early morning, lemon-colored, filled Michael's bedroom. He awoke, and feeling Apollonia's satiny body against his own sleep-warm skin, made her come awake with love. When they were done, even all the months of complete possession could not stop him from marveling at her beauty and her passion. She left the bedroom to wash and dress in the bathroom down the hall. Michael, still naked, the morning sun refreshing his body, lit a cigarette and relaxed on the bed. This was the last morning they would spend in this house and the villa. Don Tomasino had arranged for him to be transferred to another town on the southern coast of Sicily. Apollonia, in the first month of pregnancy, wanted to visit with her family for a few weeks and would join him at the new hiding place after the visit. The night before, Don Tomasino had sat with Michael in the garden after Apollonia had gone to bed. The Don had been worried and tired, and admitted that he was concerned about Michael's safety.
Your marriage brought you into sight. I'm surprised your father hasn't made arrangements for you to go someplace else. In any case, I'm having my own troubles with the young Turks in Palermo. I've offered some fair arrangements so that they can wet their beaks more than they deserve. But those scum want everything. I can't understand their attitude. They've tried a few little tricks, but I'm not so easy to kill. They must know I'm too strong for them to hold me so cheaply. But that's the trouble with young people, no matter how talented. They don't reason things out, and they want all the water in the well.
And then Don Tomasino had told Michael that the two shepherds, Fabrizio and Carlo, would go with him as bodyguards in the Alfa Romeo. Don Tomasino would say his goodbyes tonight, since he would be off early in the morning at dawn to see to his affairs in Palermo. Also, Michael was not to tell Dr. Taza about the move, since the doctor planned to spend the evening in Palermo and might blab. Michael had known Don Tomasino was in trouble. Armed guards patrolled the walls of the villa at night, and a few faithful shepherds with their lupadas were always in the house. Don Tomasino himself went heavily armed, and a personal bodyguard attended him at all times. The morning sun was now too strong. Michael stubbed out his cigarette and put on work pants, work shirt, and the peaked cap most Sicilian men wore. Still barefooted, he leaned out his bedroom window and saw Fabrizio sitting in one of the garden chairs. Fabrizio was lazily combing his thick, dark hair. His lupada was carelessly thrown across the garden table. Michael whistled, and Fabrizio looked up to his window. Michael called down to him.
Get the car!
I'll be leaving in 5 minutes. Where's Carlo?
Fabrizio stood up. His shirt was open, exposing the blue and red lines of the tattoo on his chest.
Carlo is having a cup of coffee in the kitchen. Is your wife coming with you?
Michael squinted down at him. It occurred to him that Fabrizio had been following Apollonia too much with his eyes the last few weeks. Not that he would dare ever to make an advance toward the wife of a friend of the Don's. In Sicily, there was no surer road to death.
No, she's going home to her family first. She'll join us in a few days.
He watched Fabrizio hurry into the stone hut that served as a garage for the Alfa Romeo. Michael went down the hall to wash. Apollonia was gone. She was most likely in the kitchen preparing his breakfast with her own hands to wash out the guilt she felt because she wanted to see her family one more time before going so far away to the other end of Sicily. Don Tomasino would arrange transportation for her to where Michael would be. Down in the kitchen, the old woman, Filomena, brought him his coffee and shyly bid him a goodbye.
I'll remember you to my father.
And she nodded. Carlo came into the kitchen and said to Michael,
The car's outside. Shall I get your bag?
No, I'll get it. Where's Apollo?
Carlo's face broke into an amused grin.
She's sitting in the driver's seat of the car, dying to step onto the gas. She'll be a real American woman before she gets to America.
It was unheard of for one of the peasant women in Sicily to attempt driving a car, but Michael sometimes let Apollonia guide the Alfa Romeo around the inside of the villa walls, always beside her, however, because she sometimes stepped on the gas when she meant to step on the brake. Michael said to Carlo,
Get Fabrizio and wait for me in the car.
He went out of the kitchen and ran up the stairs to the bedroom. His bag was already packed. Before picking it up, he looked out the window and saw the car parked in front of the portico steps rather than the kitchen entrance. Apollonia was sitting in the car, her hands on the wheel, like a child playing. Carlo was just putting the lunch basket in the rear seat. And then Michael was annoyed to see Fabrizio disappearing through the gates of the villa on some errand outside. What the hell was he doing? He saw Fabrizio take a look over his shoulder, a look that was somehow furtive. He'd have to straighten that damn shepherd out. Michael went down the stairs and decided to go through the kitchen to see Filomena again and give her a final farewell. He asked the old woman,
Is Dr. Taza still sleeping?
Filomena's wrinkled face was sly.
All roosters can't greet the sun. The doctor went to Palermo last night.
Michael laughed. He went out the kitchen entrance, and the smell of lemon blossoms penetrated even his sinus-filled nose. He saw Apollonia wave to him from the car just 10 paces up the villa's driveway, and then he realized she was motioning him to stay where he was, that she meant to drive the car to where he stood. Carlo stood grinning beside the car, his lupata dangling in his hand. But there was still no sign of Fabrizio. At that moment, without any conscious reasoning process, everything came together in his mind, and Michael shouted to the girl,
No! No!
But his shout was drowned in the roar of the tremendous explosion as Apollonia switched on the ignition. The kitchen door shattered into fragments, and Michael was hurled along the wall of the villa for a good 10 feet. Stones tumbling from the villa roof hit him on the shoulders, and one glanced off his skull as he was lying on the ground. He was conscious just long enough to see that nothing remained of the Alfa Romeo but its 4 wheels and the steel shafts which held them together. He came to consciousness in a room that seemed very dark, and heard voices that were so low that they were pure sound rather than words. Out of animal instinct, he tried to pretend he was still unconscious, but the voices stopped, and someone was leaning from a chair close to his bed, and the voice was distinct now, saying,
Well, he's with us finally.
A lamp went on, its light like white fire on his eyeballs, and Michael turned his head. It felt very heavy, numb, and then he could see the face over his bed was that of Dr. Taza.
Let me look at you a minute, and I'll put the light out.
He was busy shining a small pencil flashlight into Michael's eyes.
He'll be all right.
Dr. Taza turned to someone else in the room.
You can speak to him.
It was Don Tomasino sitting on a chair near his bed. Michael could see him clearly now.
Michael? Michael, can I talk to you? Do you want to rest?
It was easier to raise a hand to make a gesture, and Michael did so. And Don Tomasino said,
Did Fabrizio bring the car from the garage?
Michael, without knowing he did so, smiled. It was in some strange way a chilling smile of assent.
Fabrizio has vanished. Listen to me, Michael. You've been unconscious for nearly a week. Do you understand? Everybody thinks you're dead, so you're safe now. They've stopped looking for you. I've sent messages to your father, and he sent back Instructions. It won't be long now. You'll be back in America. Meanwhile, you'll rest here, quietly. You're safe up in the mountains in a special farmhouse I own. The Palermo people have made their peace with me, now that you are supposed to be dead. So it was you they were after all the time. They wanted to kill you, while making people think it was me they were after. That's something you should know. As for everything else, leave it all to me. You recover your strength, and be tranquil.
Michael was remembering everything now. He knew his wife was dead, that Kahlo was dead. He thought of the old woman in the kitchen. He couldn't remember if she'd come outside with him. He whispered,
Philomena?
She wasn't hurt. Just a bloody nose from the blast. Don't worry about her.
Fabrizio, let your shepherds know that the one who gives me Fabrizio will own the finest pastures in Sicily.
Both men seemed to sigh with relief. Don Tomasino lifted a glass from a nearby table and drank from it an amber fluid that jolted his head up. Dr. Taza sat on the bed.
You know, you're a widower. That's rare in Sicily.
As if the distinction might comfort him. Michael motioned to Don Tomasino to lean closer. The Don sat on the bed and bent his head.
Tell my father to get me home. Tell my father I wish to be his son.
But it was to be another month before Michael recovered from his injuries, and another 2 months after that before all the necessary papers and arrangements were ready. Then he was flown from Palermo to Rome, and from Rome to New York. In all that time, no trace had been found of Fabrizio. Book 7, Chapter 25. When Kay Adams received her college degree, she took a job teaching grade school in her New Hampshire hometown. The first 6 months after Michael vanished, she made weekly telephone calls to his mother asking about him. Mrs. Corleone was always friendly and always wound up saying, "You were very, very nice a girl. You forget about Mikey and find a nicer husband." Kay was not offended at her bluntness and understood that the mother spoke out of concern for her as a young girl in an impossible situation. When her first school term ended, she decided to go to New York to buy some decent clothes and see some old college girlfriends. She thought also about looking for some sort of interesting job in New York. She had lived like a spinster for almost 2 years, reading and teaching, refusing dates, refusing to go out at all, even though she had given up making calls to Long Beach. She knew she couldn't keep that up. She was becoming irritable and unhappy. But she had always believed Michael would write her or send her a message of some sort. That he had not done so humiliated her. It saddened her that he was so distrustful, even of her. She took an early train and was checked into her hotel by mid-afternoon. Her girlfriends worked, and she didn't want to bother them at their jobs. She planned to call them at night. And she didn't really feel like going shopping after the exhausting train trip. Being alone in the hotel room, remembering all the times she and Michael had used hotel rooms to make love, gave her a feeling of desolation. It was that, more than anything else, that gave her the idea of calling Michael's mother out in Long Beach. The phone was answered by a rough, masculine voice with a typical, to her, New York accent. Kay asked to speak to Mrs. Corleone. There was a few minutes' silence, and then Kay heard the heavily accented voice asking who it was. Kay was a little embarrassed now.
This is Kay Adams, Mrs. Corleone. Do you remember me?
Sure, I remember you. How come you no call up no more? You get married?
Oh, no. I've been busy.
She was surprised at the mother obviously being annoyed that she had stopped calling.
Have you heard anything from Michael? Is he all right?
There was silence at the other end of the phone, and then Mrs. Corleone's voice came strong.
Mikey is home. He no call you up? He no see you?
Kay felt her stomach go weak from shock and a humiliating desire to weep. Her voice broke a little when she asked,
How long has he been home?
6 months.
Oh, I see.
And she did. She felt hot waves of shame that Michael's mother knew he was treating her so cheaply. And then she was angry. Angry at Michael, at his mother, angry at all foreigners, Italians who didn't have the common courtesy to keep up a decent show of friendship, even if a love affair was over. Didn't Michael know she would be concerned for him as a friend, even if he no longer wanted her for a bed companion, even if he no longer wanted to marry her? Did he think she was one of those poor, benighted Italian girls who would commit suicide or make a scene after giving up her virginity and then being thrown over? But she kept her voice as cool as possible.
I see. Thank you very much. I'm glad Michael's home again and all right. I just wanted to know. I won't call you again.
Mrs. Corleone's voice came impatiently over the phone, as if she had heard nothing that Kay had said.
You want to see Mikey? You come out here now. Give him a nice surprise. You take a taxi and tell the man at the gate to pay the taxi for you. You tell the taxi man he gets 2 times his clock. Otherwise, he don't come way out of Long Beach. But don't you pay. My husband's a man at the gate pay the taxi.
I couldn't do that, Mrs. Corleone. If Michael wanted to see me, he would have called me at home before this. Obviously, he doesn't want to resume our relationship.
You a very nice girl. You got a nice legs, but you no got a much brains.
She chuckled.
You come out to see me, not Mikey. I want to talk to you. You come out right now, and no pay the taxi. I wait for you.
The phone clicked. Mrs. Corleone had hung up. Kay could have called back and said she wasn't coming, but she knew she had to see Michael, to talk to him, even if it was just polite talk. If he was home now, openly, that meant he was no longer in trouble. He could live normally. She jumped off the bed and started to get ready to see him. She took a great deal of care with her makeup and dress. When she was ready to leave, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. Was she better looking than when Michael had disappeared? Or would he find her unattractively older? Her figure had become more womanly, her hips rounder, her breasts fuller. Italians liked that, supposedly, though Michael had always said he loved her being so thin. It didn't matter, really. Michael obviously didn't want anything to do with her anymore. Otherwise, he most certainly would have called in the 6 months he had been home. The taxi she hailed refused to take her to Long Beach until she gave him a pretty smile and told him she would pay double the meter. It was nearly an hour's ride, and the mall in Long Beach had changed since she last saw it. There were iron fences around it, and an iron gate barred the mall entrance. A man wearing slacks and a white jacket over a red shirt opened the gate, poked his head into the cab to read the meter, and gave the cab driver some bills. Then, when Kay saw the driver was not protesting and was happy with the money paid, she got out and walked across the mall to the central house. Mrs. Corleone herself opened the door and greeted Kay with a warm embrace that surprised her. Then she surveyed Kay with an appraising eye.
You are beautiful, girl. I have a stupid sons.
She pulled Kay inside the door and led her to the kitchen, where a platter of food was already set out and a pot of coffee perked on the stove.
Michael comes home pretty soon. You surprise him.
They sat down together, and the old woman forced Kay to eat, meanwhile asking questions with great curiosity. She was delighted that Kay was a schoolteacher, and that she had come to New York to visit old girlfriends, and that Kay was only 24 years old. She kept nodding her head as if all the facts accorded with some private specifications in her mind. Kay was so nervous that she just answered the questions, never saying anything else. She saw him first, through the kitchen window. A car pulled up in front of the house, and 2 other men got out. Then, Michael. He straightened up to talk with one of the other men. His profile, the left one, was exposed to her view. It was cracked, indented, like the plastic face of a doll that a child has wantonly kicked. In a curious way, it did not mar his handsomeness in her eyes, but moved her to tears. She saw him put a snow-white handkerchief to his mouth and nose and hold it there for a moment while he turned away to come into the house. She heard the door open and his footsteps in the hall turning into the kitchen, and then he was in the open space, seeing her and his mother. He seemed impassive, and then he smiled ever so slightly, the broken half of his face halting the widening of his mouth. And Kay, who had meant just to say, "Hello, how are you?" in the coolest possible way, slipped out of her seat to run into his arms, bury her face against his shoulder. He kissed her wet cheek and held her until she finished weeping, and then he walked her out to his car, waved his bodyguard away, and drove off with her beside him, she repairing her makeup by simply wiping what was left of it away with her handkerchief.
I never meant to do that. It's just that nobody told me how badly they hurt you.
Michael laughed and touched the broken side of his face.
You mean this? That's nothing. It just gives me sinus trouble. Now that I'm home, I'll probably get it fixed. I couldn't write you or anything. You have to understand that before anything else.
Okay.
I've got a place in the city. Is it all right if we go there, or should it be dinner and drinks at a restaurant?
I'm not hungry.
They drove toward New York in silence for a while.
Did you get your degree?
Yes. I'm teaching grade school in my hometown now. Did they find the man who really killed the policeman? Is that why you were able to come home?
For a moment, Michael didn't answer.
Yes, they did. It was in all the New York papers. Didn't you read about it?
Kay laughed with the relief of him denying he was a murderer.
We only get the New York Times up in our town. I guess it was buried back in page 89. If I'd read about it, I'd have called your mother sooner.
She paused and then said,
It's funny, the way your mother used to talk. I almost believed you'd done it. And just before you came, while we were drinking coffee, she told me about that crazy man who confessed.
Maybe my mother did believe it at first.
Your own mother?
Michael grinned.
Mothers are like cops. They always believe the worst.
Michael parked the car in a garage on Mulberry Street, where the owner seemed to know him. He took Kay around the corner to what looked like a fairly decrepit brownstone house, which fitted into the rundown neighborhood. Michael had a key to the front door, and when they went inside, Kay saw that it was as expensively and comfortably furnished as a millionaire's townhouse. Michael led her to the upstairs apartment, which consisted of an enormous living room, a huge kitchen and door that led to the bedroom. In one corner of the living room was a bar, and Michael mixed them both a drink. They sat on a sofa together, and Michael said quietly,
We might as well go into the bedroom.
Kay took a long pull from her drink and smiled at him.
Yes.
For Kay, the lovemaking was almost like it had been before, except that Michael was rougher, more direct, not as tender as he had been. As if he were on guard against her, but she didn't want to complain. It would wear off. In a funny way, men were more sensitive in a situation like this, she thought. She had found making love to Michael after a 2-year absence the most natural thing in the world. It was as if he had never been away.
You could have written me. You could have trusted me.
She said, nestling against his body.
I would have practiced the New England omerta. Yankees are pretty close-mouthed, too, you know.
Michael laughed softly in the darkness.
I never figured you to be waiting. I never figured you to wait after what happened.
I never believed you killed those 2 men, except maybe when your mother seemed to think so. But I never believed it in my heart. I know you too well.
She could hear Michael give a sigh.
It doesn't matter whether I did or not. You have to understand that.
Kay was a little stunned by the coldness in his voice.
So just tell me now, did you or didn't you?
Michael sat up on his pillow, and in the darkness a light flared as he got a cigarette going.
If I asked you to marry me, would I have to answer that question first before you'd give me an answer to mine?
I don't care. I love you. I don't care. If you loved me, you wouldn't be afraid to tell me the truth. You wouldn't be afraid I might tell the police. That's it, isn't it? You're really a gangster then, isn't that so? But I really don't care. What I care about is that you obviously don't love me. You didn't even call me up when you got back home.
Michael was puffing on his cigarette, and some burning ashes fell on Kay's bare back. She flinched a little.
Stop torturing me. I won't talk.
Michael didn't laugh. His voice sounded absent-minded.
You know, when I came home, I wasn't that glad when I saw my family, my father, my mother, my sister Connie, and Tom. It was nice, but I didn't really give a damn. Then I came home tonight, and I saw you in the kitchen, and I was glad. Is that what you mean by love?
That's close enough for me.
They made love again for a while. Michael was more tender this time, and then he went out to get them both a drink. When he came back, he sat on an armchair facing the bed.
Let's get serious. How do you feel about marrying me?
Kay smiled at him and motioned him into the bed. Michael smiled back at her.
Be serious. I can't tell you about anything that happened. I'm working for my father now. I'm being trained to take over the family olive oil business. But you know my family has enemies. My father has enemies. You might be a very young widow. There's a chance, not much of one, but it could happen. And I won't be telling you what happened at the office every day. I won't be telling you anything about my business. You'll be my wife, but you won't be my partner in life, as I think they say. Not an equal partner. That can't be.
Kay sat up in bed. She switched on a huge lamp standing on the night table, and then she lit a cigarette. She leaned back on the pillows.
You're telling me you're a gangster, isn't that it? You're telling me that you're responsible for people being killed and other sundry crimes related to murder, and that I'm not ever to ask about that part of your life, not even to think about it, just like in the horror movies when the monster asked the beautiful girl to marry him.
Michael grinned, the cracked part of his face turned toward her. And Kay said in contrition,
Oh, Mike, I don't even notice that stupid thing. I swear I don't.
I know. I like having it now, except that it makes the snot drip out of my nose.
You said be serious. If we get married, what kind of a life am I supposed to lead? Like your mother? Like an Italian housewife with just the kids and home to take care of? And what about if something happens? I suppose you could wind up in jail someday.
No, that's not possible. Killed, yes. Jail, no.
Kay laughed at this confidence. It was a laugh that had a funny mixture of pride with its amusement.
But how can you say that? Really?
Michael sighed.
These are all the things I can't talk to you about. I don't want to talk to you about.
Kay was silent for a long time.
Why do you want me to marry you after never calling me all these months? Am I so good in bed?
Michael nodded gravely.
Sure. But I'm getting it for nothing, so why should I marry you for that? Look, I don't want an answer now. We're going to keep seeing each other. You can talk it over with your parents. I hear your father's a real tough guy in his own way. Listen to his advice.
You haven't answered why. Why you want to marry me.
Michael took a white handkerchief from the drawer of the night table and held it to his nose. He blew into it and then wiped.
That's the best reason for not marrying me. How would that be, having a guy around who always has to blow his nose?
Come on, be serious. I asked you a question.
Michael held the handkerchief in his hand.
Okay, this one time. You're the only person I felt any affection for that I care about. I didn't call you because it never occurred to me that you'd still be interested in me after everything that's happened. Sure, I could have chased you, I could have conned you, but I didn't want to do that. Now here's something I'll trust you with, and I don't want you to repeat it, even to your father. If everything goes right, the Corleone family will be completely legitimate in about 5 years. Some very tricky things have to be done to make that possible. That's when you may become a wealthy widow. Now, what do I want you for? Well, because I want you, and I want a family. I want kids. It's time. And I don't want those kids to be influenced by me the way I was influenced by my father. I don't mean my father deliberately influenced me. He never did. He never even wanted me in the family business. He wanted me to become a professor or a doctor, something like that. But things went bad, and I had to fight for my family. I had to fight because I love and admire my father. I never knew a man more worthy of respect. He was a good husband and a good father and a good friend to people who are not so fortunate in life. There's another side to him, but that's not relevant to me as his son. Anyway, I don't want that to happen to my kids. I want them to be influenced by you. I want them to grow up to be all-American kids, real all-American, the whole works. Maybe they or their grandchildren will go into politics.
Michael grinned.
Maybe one of them will be President of the United States. Why the hell not? In my history course at Dartmouth, we did some background on all the presidents, and they had fathers and grandfathers who were lucky they didn't get hanged. But I'll settle for my kids being doctors or musicians or teachers. They'll never be in the family business. By the time they're that old, I'll be retired anyway. And you and I will be part of some country club crowd, the good, simple life of well-to-do Americans. How does that strike you for a proposition?
Marvelous. But you sort of skipped over the widow part.
There's not much chance of that. I just mentioned it to give you a fair presentation.
Michael patted his nose with a handkerchief.
I can't believe it. I can't believe you're a man like that. You're just not.
Her face had a bewildered look.
I just don't understand the whole thing, how it could possibly be.
Well, I'm not giving any more explanations. You know, you don't have to think about any of this stuff. It has nothing to do with you, really, or with our life together if we get married.
Kay shook her head.
How can you want to marry me? How can you hint that you love me? You never say the word, but you just now said you loved your father. You never said you loved me. How could you, if you distrust me so much you can't tell me about the most important things in your life? How can you want to have a wife you can't trust? Your father trusts your mother, I know that.
Sure, but that doesn't mean he tells her everything. And you know, he has reason to trust her, not because they got married and she's his wife, but she bore him 4 children in times when it was not that safe to bear children. She nursed and guarded him when people shot him. She believed in him. He was always her first loyalty for 40 years. After you do that, maybe I'll tell you a few things you really don't want to hear.
Will we have to live in the mall?
Michael nodded.
We'll have our own house. It won't be so bad. My parents don't meddle. Our lives will be our own, but until everything gets straightened out, I have to live in the mall.
Because it's dangerous for you to live outside it.
For the first time since she had come to know him, she saw Michael angry. It was cold, chilling anger that was not externalized in any gesture or change in voice. It was a coldness that came off him like death, and Kay knew that it was this coldness that would make her decide not to marry him, if she so decided.
The trouble is all that damned trash in the movies and the newspapers. You've got the wrong idea of my father and the Corleone family. I'll make a final explanation, and this one will be really final. My father is a businessman trying to provide for his wife and children, and those friends he might need someday in a time of trouble. He doesn't accept the rules of the society we live in, because those rules would have condemned him to a life not suitable to a man like himself, a man of extraordinary force and character. What you have to understand is that he considers himself the equal of all those great men, like presidents and prime ministers and Supreme Court justices and governors of the states. He refuses to accept their will over his own. He refuses to live by rules set up by others, rules which condemn him to a defeated life. His ultimate aim is to enter that society with a certain power, since society doesn't really protect its members who do not have their own individual power. In the meantime, he operates on a code of ethics he considers far superior to the legal structures of society.
Kay was looking at him incredulously.
But that's ridiculous. What if everybody felt the same way? How could society ever function? We'd be back in the times of the cavemen. Mike, you don't believe what you're saying, do you?
Michael grinned at her.
I'm just telling you what my father believes. I just want you to understand that whatever else he is, he's not irresponsible, or at least not in the society which he has created. He's not a crazy machine-gunning mobster, as you seem to think. He's a responsible man in his own way.
And what do you believe?
Michael shrugged.
I believe in my family. I believe in you and the family we may have. I don't trust society to protect us. I have no intention of placing my fate in the hands of men whose only qualification is that they manage to con a block of people to vote for them. But that's for now. My father's time is done. The things he did can no longer be done except with a great deal of risk. Whether we like it or not, the Corleone family has to join that society. But when they do, I'd like us to join it with plenty of our own power, that is, money and ownership of other valuables. I'd like to make my children as secure as possible before they join that general destiny.
But you volunteered to fight for your country. You were a war hero. What happened to make you change?
This is really getting us no place. But maybe I'm just one of those real old-fashioned conservatives that grow up in your hometown. I take care of myself, individual. Governments really don't do much for their people. That's what it comes down to. But that's not it, really. All I can say, I have to help my father. I have to be on his side. And you have to make your decision about being on my side.
He smiled at her.
I guess getting married was a bad idea.
Kay patted the bed.
I don't know about marrying, but I've gone without a man for 2 years, and I'm not letting you off so easy now. Come on in here.
When they were in bed together, the light out, she whispered to him.
Do you believe me about not having a man since you left?
I believe you.
Did you?
Yes.
He felt her stiffen a little.
But not in the last 6 months.
It was true. Kay was the first woman he had made love to since the death of Apollonia. Chapter 26. The garish suite overlooked the fake fairyland grounds in the rear of the hotel, transplanted palm trees lit up by climbers of orange lights, 2 huge swimming pools shimmering dark blue by the light of the desert stars. On the horizon were the sand and stone mountains that ringed Las Vegas, nestling in its neon valley. Johnny Fontaine let the heavy, richly embroidered gray drape fall and turned back to the room. A special detail of 4 men, a pit boss, a dealer, extra relief man, and a cocktail waitress in her scanty nightclub costume were getting things ready for private action. Nino Valenti was lying on the sofa in the living room part of the suite, a water glass of whiskey in his hand. He watched the people from the casino setting up the blackjack table with the proper 6 padded chairs around its horseshoe outer rim. He said in a slurred voice that was not quite drunken,
That's great, that's great. Johnny, come on and gamble with me against these bastards. I got the luck. We'll beat their crullers in.
Johnny sat on a footstool opposite the couch.
You know I don't gamble. How you feeling, Nino?
Nino Valenti grinned at him.
Great. I got broads coming up at midnight, then some supper, then back to the blackjack table. You know, I got the house beat for almost $50,000, and they've been grinding me for a week.
Yeah. Who do you want to leave it to when you croak?
Nino drained his glass empty.
Johnny, where the hell do you get your rep as a swinger? You're a deadhead, Johnny. Christ, the tourists in this town have more fun than you do.
Yeah. You want to lift to that blackjack table?
Nino struggled erect on the sofa and planted his feet firmly on the rug.
I can make it.
He let the glass slip to the floor and got up and walked quite steadily to where the blackjack table had been set up. The dealer was ready. The pit boss stood behind the dealer, watching. The relief dealer sat on a chair away from the table. The cocktail waitress sat on another chair in a line of vision so that she could see any of Nino Valenti's gestures. Nino rapped on the green baize with his knuckles.
Chips.
The pit boss took a pad from his pocket and filled out a slip and put it in front of Nino with a small fountain pen.
Here you are, Mr. Valenti. The usual 5,000 to start.
Nino scrawled his signature on the bottom of the slip, and the pit boss put it in his pocket. He nodded to the dealer. The dealer, with incredibly deft fingers, took stacks of black and gold $100 chips from the built-in racks before him. In not more than 5 seconds, Nino had 5 even stacks of $100 chips before him. Each stack had 10 chips. There were 6 squares, a little larger than playing card shapes, etched in white on the green baize, each square placed to correspond to where a player would sit. Now, Nino was placing bets on 3 of these squares, single chips, and so playing 3 hands each for $100. He refused to take a hit on all 3 hands because the dealer had a 6-up, a bust card, and the dealer did bust. Nino raked in his chips and turned to Johnny Fontaine.
That's how to start the night, huh, Johnny?
Johnny smiled. It was unusual for a gambler like Nino to have to sign a chit while gambling. A word was usually good enough for the high rollers. Maybe they were afraid Nino wouldn't remember his takeout because of his drinking. They didn't know that Nino remembered everything. Nino kept winning, and after the 3rd round, lifted a finger at the cocktail waitress. She went to the bar at the end of the room and brought him his usual rye in a water glass. Nino took the drink, switched it to his other hand so he could put an arm around the waitress.
Sit with me, honey. Play a few hands. Bring me luck.
The cocktail waitress was a very beautiful girl, but Johnny could see she was all cold hustle, no real personality, though she worked at it. She was giving Nino a big smile, but her tongue was hanging out for one of those black and gold chips. What the hell, Johnny thought. Why shouldn't she get some of it? He just regretted that Nino wasn't getting something better for his money. Nino let the waitress play his hands for a few rounds, and then gave her one of the chips and a pat on the behind to send her away from the table. Johnny motioned to her to bring him a drink. She did so, but she did it as if she were playing the most dramatic moment in the most dramatic movie ever made. She turned all her charm on the great Johnny Fontaine. She made her eyes sparkle with invitation. Her walk was the sexiest walk ever walked. Her mouth was very slightly parted, as if she were ready to bite the nearest object of her obvious passion. She resembled nothing so much as a female animal in heat, but it was a deliberate act. Johnny Fontaine thought, Christ, one of them. It was the most popular approach of women who wanted to take him to bed. It only worked when he was very drunk, and he wasn't drunk now. He gave the girl one of his famous grins.
Thank you, honey.
The girl looked at him and parted her lips in a thank-you smile. Her eyes went all smoky, her body tensed with the torso leaning slightly back from the long, tapering legs in their mesh stockings. An enormous tension seemed to be building up in her body. Her breasts seemed to grow fuller and swell burstingly against her thin, scantily cut blouse. Then, her whole body gave a slight quiver that almost let off a sexual twang. The whole impression was one of a woman having an orgasm simply because Johnny Fontaine had smiled at her and said, "Thank you, honey." It was very well done. It was done better than Johnny had ever seen it done before, but by now he knew it was fake, and the odds were always good that the broads who did it were a lousy lay. He watched her go back to her chair and nursed his drink slowly. He didn't want to see that little trick again. He wasn't in the mood for it tonight. It was an hour before Nino Valenti began to go. He started leaning first, wavered back, then plunged off the chair straight to the floor. But the pit boss and the relief dealer had been alerted by the first weave and caught him before he hit the ground. They lifted him and carried him through the parted drapes that led to the bedroom of the suite. Johnny kept watching as the cocktail waitress helped the other two men undress Nino and shove him under the bed covers. The pit boss was counting Nino's chips and making a note on his pad of chits, then guarding the table with its dealer's chips. Johnny said to him,
"How long has that been going on?"
The pit boss shrugged.
He went early tonight. The first time we got the house doc and he fixed Mr. Valenti up with something and gave him some sort of a lecture. Then Nino told us that we shouldn't call the doc when that happened. Just put him to bed and he'd be okay in the morning. So that's what we do. He's pretty lucky. He was a winner again tonight. Almost $3,000.
Well, let's get the house doc up here tonight, okay? Page the casino floor if you have to.
It was almost 15 minutes before Jules Siegel came into the suite. Johnny noted with irritation that this guy never looked like a doctor. Tonight he was wearing a blue, loose-knit polo shirt with white trim, some sort of white suede shoes, and no socks. He looked funny as hell carrying the traditional black doctor's bag. Johnny said,
You ought to figure out a way to carry your stuff in a cut-down golf bag.
Jules grinned understandingly.
Yeah, this medical school carry-all is a real drag. Scares the hell out of people. They should change the color anyway.
He went over to where Nino was lying in bed. As he opened his bag, he said to Johnny,
Thanks for that check you sent me as a consultant. It was excessive. I didn't do that much.
Like hell you didn't. Anyway, forget that. That was a long time ago. What's with Nino?
Jules was making a quick examination of heartbeat, pulse, and blood pressure. He took a needle out of his bag and shoved it casually into Nino's arm and pressed the plunger. Nino's sleeping face lost its waxy paleness. Color came into the cheeks, as if the blood had started pumping faster.
Very simple diagnosis. I had a chance to examine him and run some tests when he first came here, and fainted. I had him moved to the hospital before he regained consciousness. He's got diabetes, mild adult stabile, which is no problem if you take care of it with medication and diet and so forth. He insists on ignoring it. Also, he is firmly determined to drink himself to death. His liver is going, and his brain will go. Right now he's in a mild diabetic coma. My advice is to have him put away.
Johnny felt a sense of relief. It couldn't be too serious. All Nino had to do was take care of himself.
You mean in one of those joints where they dry you out?
Jules went over to the bar in the far corner of the room and made himself a drink.
No, I mean committed. You know, the crazy house.
Don't be funny.
I'm not joking. I'm not up on all the psychiatric jazz, but I know something about it, part of my trade. Your friend Nino can be put back into fairly good shape, unless the liver damage has gone too far, which we can't know until an autopsy, really. But the real disease is in his head. In essence, he doesn't care if he dies. Maybe he even wants to kill himself. Until that is cured, there's no hope for him. That's why I say have him committed, and then he can undergo the necessary psychiatric treatment.
There was a knock on the door, and Johnny went to answer it. It was Lucy Mancini. She came into Johnny's arms and kissed him.
Oh, Johnny, it's so good to see you.
It's been a long time.
He noticed that Lucy had changed. She had gotten much slimmer, her clothes were a hell of a lot better, and she wore them better. Her hairstyle fitted her face in a sort of boyish cut. She looked younger and better than he had ever seen her, and the thought crossed his mind that she could keep him company here in Vegas. It would be a pleasure hanging out with a real broad. But before he could turn on the charm, he remembered she was the doc's girl. So it was out. He made his smile just friendly and said,
What are you doing coming to Nino's apartment at night, eh?
She punched him in the shoulder.
I heard Nino was sick, and the Jules came up. I just wanted to see if I could help. Nino's okay, isn't he?
Sure, he'll be fine.
Jules Siegel had sprawled out on the couch.
Like hell he is. I suggest we all sit here and wait for Nino to come to, and then we all talk him into committing himself. Lucy, he likes you. Maybe you can help. Johnny, if you're a real friend of his, you'll go along. Otherwise, old Nino's liver will shortly be Exhibit A in some university medical lab.
Johnny was offended by the doctor's flippant attitude. Who the hell did he think he was? He started to say so, but Nino's voice came from the bed.
Hey, old buddy, how about a drink?
Nino was sitting up in bed. He grinned at Lucy.
Hey, baby, come to old Nino.
He held his arms wide open. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed and gave him a hug. Oddly enough, Nino didn't look bad at all now, almost normal. Nino snapped his fingers.
Come on, Johnny, give me a drink. The night's young yet. Where the hell's my blackjack table?
Jules took a long slug from his own glass and said to Nino,
You can't have a drink. Your doctor forbids it.
Nino scowled.
Screw my doctor.
Then a play-acting look of contrition came on his face.
Hey, Julie, that's you. You're my doctor, right? I don't mean you, old buddy.